Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I am really delighted that we're welcoming back a former guest back again and someone that I'm very excited to bring back to Access Chat, which is Juliette Burton. Juliette's welcome to the show. For those that have shorter memories, Juliette is a comedian and public speaker and does comparing and did a fantastic job when she compared our Global Accessibility Awareness Day for us during COVID, when everyone was trying to adapt to remote working and doing remote conferences and everything else, and did a great job. And it was such fun bringing comedy into a corporate setting. And I had such fun going, maybe I should, yes, well, maybe we'll cut this one. Maybe I can keep that for the outtakes. But it was a great fun thing to do. I've been a fan of you ever since I first saw you at the Business Disability Forum conference ages ago. I think that comedy is so important and having fun is so important in times where people are challenged. So welcome back, and please tell us more about what you've been up to over the last few years.
Oh gosh, thank you so much for having me. Firstly, it's just such a joy to come and do any podcast, but particularly to be a return guest and about things that I'm feeling so passionate about and that have really underpinned most of my life, really. At the Business Disability Forum, I worked for, I think, a couple of different years, 2019 and 2016, 2015. And so let's start around there, 2019. So the last few years, obviously, we did a lot of shows online during 2020 and 2021. Since then, sold out at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2024. Every single show totally sold out. I was shortlisted for the Disability Power 100. I have been on tour 3 different years, UK tours, and oh gosh, I've been performing in around Europe, mainly in the Netherlands a lot. That's had some wonderful shows up at Edinburgh Fringe this year and last year that had sold out shows, and a couple of awards. This year, best shortlisted let me get this right, shortlisted for best new show at Brighton Fringe, which was lovely. And I've been a regular guest on BBC Access All podcast, which is the BBC's disability podcast. And I will also be coming out as a guest on the award-winning podcast Drunk Women Solving Crimes, which is one of my favourite ones as well. I'm currently writing a book proposal as well. So whenever people are listening to this, lots of stuff going on and lots and lots of new shows as well. Currently on tour with my best of show, which is the best bits of my last 10 years of doing comedy. I mean, I've been doing comedy for even longer than that, but 10 years ago, 2015 was my first ever sold out total run at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So to celebrate that, I thought we would look back at the best bits of those last 10 years worth of show. And that's currently on tour around the UK.
So not a lot then.
Well, I mean, I didn't even mention the voiceover work and the audio book I've been recording as well, which
It's amazing.
Lots and lots of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, and really enjoy the material. And I love the authenticity and the fact that you bring disability and lived experience into your material. So obviously I'm familiar with it, and Deborah was talking off air about how funny she was finding it, but maybe you could talk a bit to the audience about the material and what informs your comedy.
Absolutely. So I am disabled. I have been diagnosed with 15 different mental illnesses, some of which I live with continuously and have a life-limiting effect on my life and also life-inhibiting effect on my quality of life. I also have ADHD and autism, which actually were diagnosed in the last couple of years. So the last time we spoke, Neil, they weren't diagnosed yet. So that's been interesting to go on that sort of process, that journey. And I also have some physical conditions that have been diagnosed as becoming worsening over time. So in the future, there will be some physical disability that will be coming along the road. But I feel very prepared for it, having worked in the disability sector for so long, which is wonderful. I love performing comedy because it breaks down that barrier and increases the understanding. There's always tension when I talk about some of the more, I don't like the word extreme or acute, but language is clunky, especially when we talk about some of these experiences. But for example, I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act when I was 17, and I have experienced hallucinations, full-blown audible, visual and tactile hallucinations, as well as very, very acute eating disorder experiences, both anorexia, bulimia, a binge eating disorder. And in the past, my other conditions, such as my obsessive compulsive disorder, also were very inhibiting to my quality of life. When I talk about some of those experiences to people and my depression and suicidal ideation in the past, I've learned that if there's tension building anyway, then the best way of breaking that down is to find a way to make people laugh. And when it comes to performing comedy about that, that's led me to have some incredible experiences, like touring in Australia, New Zealand, around the UK, and seeing the similarities between people's experiences, no matter where they live in the world, and hearing their stories and seeing the universal human truth of struggling. It's a struggle to be a human, and mental illness, like creativity, are two of the most human experiences we can have. And I love being able to craft comedy and find the silly in some of my personal experiences, but also not just about my mental ill health or my ADHD or my autism, but about the stigma surrounding it, and about other experiences in my life, my world, that aren't defined by those particular conditions. So I think one of my favorite reviews from this year's Edinburgh Fringe said that I was relatable as a certain swear word. So relatable is the key thing there that I love. Like, it's being able to make people in the audience, if they've experienced similar things, know that they're not alone. Making the people in the audience who haven't experienced some of these things understand them a bit more if they're curious or open-minded. But most importantly, making every single person in that room laugh and feel united in a sort of church of comedy. Because if we're all laughing together, then we're united. And I love that so much. Comedy has the power to take down the powers that be, and whether that's a political satire kind of comedy, or whether it's the big bads of stigma, misunderstanding, misconceptions, inequality, discrimination. If we're making people laugh about it, then it's the quickest way of changing somebody's mind about a situation is crafting a joke, I've found.
I agree. And I also think that that is the way society learns and changes our minds too. Because I look back at old comedy and words and things we said and that we've done and how we've all tried to be better at it. It's like, no, but you can't say that. But our comics are the ones that challenge us and that really stretch us to, it's like, and I'll give you an example. It's a silly example. I was talking to Neil about it. I said, Neil, I'm going to talk about this, but just an example. I have a daughter with Down syndrome, and she's 38 years old, Juliette, and she's just a very interesting woman. She's not your typical, you would think of people with Down syndrome. She's a very complex woman, like every other person with. Anyway, but one thing that we were doing, a friend of mine came over and she said, oh, Deborah, there's this silly thing on Google, and it takes a picture. I take a picture of you and it'll roast you. So we all did it. I took a picture of it. It's like, oh, what you trying to do with that white hair? Anyway, they made fun of me, and it was cute and clever. And then my boyfriend did it. My friends did it. And Sarah walks in the room. I said, Sarah, come on, this is so fun. And I took a picture of Sarah, and it came back and it said, it is not appropriate to be making fun of me. And it wouldn't roast her. And so I was like, well, first of all, you go Google. But then I thought, but wait a minute. She wants to be roasted too, Juliette. So I just wanted to bring that out and then ask you what I think is a very complicated question, in that I know you've worked with corporations and you've gone in there and you're talking to them about different things. I mean, Neil gave you a glowing review. But how, Juliette, do you go in there and talk about these mental health issues, especially when we're hiding from them or we're trying to be conscious? And it's like, Google, does Sarah have the right, with a young lady with Down syndrome that wanted to play, to have the app make fun of her like it made fun of me? Or, oh my gosh, it's so complicated. So I was just curious, how do you take on these topics? Because these corporations need to talk about this stuff. They need to. We're all drowning in this mental health crisis all over the world. But how do you try to address it with, yeah.
Well, there's about 3 different things I'd love to pull out of that, because we bring up some really interesting topics. Firstly, the idea that comedy stretches our boundaries, right? I think it is classically in all of mythology, even the trickster characters, the Loki in the Norse mythology, the characters that tread the boundaries, and even in Shakespearean plays, the comedic relief, the fool, is the one that can say the truth to the king, the power that is, and they're able to give them that sort of grounding within the comedic the truth wrapped in a lie is what a joke is, according to my old National Film and Television School tutor, who was one of the great producers of comedy shows. His name's Bill Dare. He did things like Dead Ringers and Spitting Image. That was his take. The idea that all of these characters, the comedians, the comedy characters, they tread the boundaries of what's acceptable in society and what isn't acceptable. And that's where that titillation of laughter comes from. So imagining society as being a big circle and then what is acceptable being on the inside and what isn't acceptable being on the outside, we are literally massaging the audience into accepting more and more into that circle to become socially acceptable. So for example, something like disability, if it used to be socially unacceptable on the outside, if we're laughing together about it in an informed way. So this is where the question around your Google issue comes in, or anybody making what is appropriate to make fun of. Well, it firstly depends on the context. It secondly depends on the voice saying the joke. So perhaps there's certain things that are more universally accepted to be able to make fun of because they're more universally accepted as things that we can take down. So every joke needs to punch up. That's the phrase. So we are punching up to discrimination, politicians, maybe for me, it would be misogynistic views or sexist views as well. That's just, again, in my context, my area, but not necessarily for every comedian and not necessarily for every audience that I'm performing to. So I'll adapt my material sometimes based on that audience. It also, for me, if I'm talking about my experiences of my disabilities, it needs to come from an informed perspective, being aware of my intention behind every joke. Like, who is it that I'm belittling or what is it that I'm belittling? And in what way am I doing that? So even in an audience, when I'm doing crowd work, quite often I love this era of my career where I'm so much more confident now being able to assess a room and assess what the characters are in the room as best as I can, my best knowledge, making them feel incredibly welcome, making them feel like they're heroes in ways that they feel they've consented to. So making sure that I'm not picking on anybody or bullying or belittling. That's just my personal ethical vibe. But the people who are clearly leaning forward and wanting to be a part of it. So yeah, making sure that every joke is, from my perspective, I feel like I would stand by it. You know, if somebody really took me to a court of law over a joke, would I be willing to be held accountable for that joke? Yeah, 100%. Every single joke that comes out of my mouth, I would defend if anyone wanted to chat with me about it. The other thing is being aware of the difference between offence caused and harm caused. So there is a difference between harm and offence. Some jokes actually can harm audience members. Some jokes, might split an audience, or they might cause offence. That is different to harm. And I suppose in the Google instance that you're talking about with Sarah, I think it would be amazing if Sarah herself were able to make jokes about her experiences and what she finds funny. I make fun about my experiences, what I find funny about my weird little brain and my idiosyncrasies. Sometimes they're related to my conditions. And in the context of my nearest and dearest, like the people that know me the best, they will poke fun at me and poke fun at my conditions and the way that it affects my behavior. They also know me well enough to know when it's appropriate to do that. Potentially not in the middle of me having a depressive episode, or potentially not when I'm having a very difficult ADHD overwhelm and autism sensory overload. At other times, we can all bond with each other by, bringing light to it, because some of those experiences can be very dark, particularly the discrimination and the stigma and the misconceptions around it. Finding the funny is the way of finding the light within the darkness. So for me, that's definitely the point of comedy. So yeah, I think comedy has a great role to play in society politically as well, and as well as being able to educate and inform people. It's not my job to educate and inform. My job is to entertain. If people happen to get educated along the way, well, that's just fantastic, and I love that as well.
Juliet, you talked about your journey and the way how you work, but going deep, what really shaped your approach to comedy?
What shapes my approach to comedy? I think, in the creative process. Do you mean in the creative process, Antonio?
Yeah, yes.
I sort of craft it. So I love this so much. We're getting into kind of the actual pragmatic approach to how I craft it. I'll often have my notepad with me. I always have a notepad everywhere I go. Anytime something that I think of that makes me laugh, or there's an interesting take, or there's something in it, like a new perspective on something, or a new analogy of something's a lot like something, I'll write it down. Then I'll take another day where I'll, when I have time to be able to take writing days, transfer all of those notes from my notepad into my completer. Sometimes I'll email myself notes when I come up with things and I'm just like, right, got an idea, there you go. Often I will do some part of the writing process in a collaboration. Now that might be with somebody else who is also very funny, and we'll just like go over each other's notes and sort of workshop it. But the best way of doing it is when stuff organically comes out of regularly performing. So I'll be performing a routine that perhaps I feel a bit more comfortable with and confident. I'll slip in a few new ideas, see where it goes, and allow enough time in my set or my show, wherever it's being performed, to play with the audience and sort of see what works. And quite often some of that crowd work stuff could develop into something that I'll keep as a regular joke. The crowd work usually is quite specific to the place that I'm in, and quite usually it might be commenting on something that's happened during the day. Some of those new ideas will start to go in, and I'll see what works, see what doesn't, see how the audience responds. Because honestly, the big thing that I think a lot of audiences might forget is that it's a conversation. Comedy is a conversation between the audience. Whatever energy they bring to it, you're going to bounce back of it. It's going to be reflected back and forward. So if an audience is particularly up for it and really energetic and energized, and they're giving you as much responses, as much kind of energy back, then we have more fun. We're going to want to play. I'm going to give them such a joyful, joyous kind of experience. Some audiences aren't feeling that. Some people, whether it's the weather, whether it's the politics that are going on at the time, what the news headlines is, sometimes an audience is not feeling as energized. And that's totally okay. Sometimes it's just the fact there's not good enough air conditioning and it's a really hot room, We can't force our lovely audience to experience it in the way that we want them to. And you have to let go of that control. So it's this gorgeous meditative experience in a way of being able to press that reset button on stage again and again, let them enjoy it in the way that they want to enjoy it, but also play with it and call it out sometimes and make sure that it's in a way that is inclusive and uplifting for everybody, not in a aren't you doing this in the way that I want you to way, but making sure that we're all in it together. Like that's my approach, is we're one big team. It's definitely not the approach of the old school stuff that we've mentioned earlier on in this podcast, which is the the bullying tactics of singling out an audience member and making them feel small. Sometimes with some audience members and some comedians, that persona that they have, that might work. For me, even when I'm, playing with the audience, it would definitely always be with you're amazing, you're incredible, I love you guys, thank you so much for being here. That's my kind of attitude, is that we're all in it together. That's how I approach it.
So, so it's less of the Jimmy Carr then, really. But some people
don't have much in common with Jimmy Carr.
No, so some people seem to quite like going along to take a verbal beating, but it's certainly not for everyone. And I was curious, and sort of following on from what Antonio was saying, you were saying that you're interacting with the audience and you're adapting stuff and so on. And you mentioned the context, but you also said you've been on tour in the Netherlands and in Australia. So the cultural context is different in those countries. Now, Australia, there are similarities, but it is different culturally. Do you find that the sort of audience reactions are different? Do you find that you have to adapt the routines based upon the cultural context?
Always. I think that if any comedian worth their salt has to be aware, like for me, before going to a different country, I like to make sure that I check in with some of the references. It's as simple as some jokes have certain punchlines that are words that don't make sense in another country's context. I think one of my jokes ends with a reference to a wheelie bin, but that's not what they call that sort of bin in the Netherlands. So out there, I had to call it a kliko, which is what they call one of their bins. Again, checking it over with people beforehand if there's something that really hinges on it, I think is vital. Another thing that I do is, particularly when I'm on tour in different countries, is definitely write stuff about the country, because we need to give it that context from the very beginning, that I am a fish out of water, and what is it that this new person's, my perspective on traveling to a new country or a new city. And that is not only appropriate for different countries, it's also appropriate for different towns that I go to, because it's that kind of glorious thing of having a new perspective on something that for that audience might feel very familiar and very mundane, being able to come in with the kind of, again, fish out of water attitude and being able to either comment on it in sort of the absurdity of something that seems so common for them, or making yourself the oddity in the story of whatever it is you're talking about. And I love that you asked about the audience differences. I mean, Australia, I would say they laugh so much more generously and loudly than any other country I've ever been to. Absolutely loved them. New Zealand seemed to be so much more engaged with the intellectual side of it, and still very generous, but lots of people wanting to chat after the shows about their experiences out there. Around Europe, it's just been glorious to be able to find those English-speaking gigs. It's the English-speaking gigs that I end up doing. And therefore, you have this international audience anyway. It's an audience that come together to meet other people who are perhaps from other countries, who are English-speaking countries, but from South America, from all across Europe, and finding the common ground amongst people from very different cultures in that sort of international nomadic kind of community in a way. I revel in making it work for that audience and making sure that I'm finding that the universal global commonalities that unite us as humans, which I adore. It makes me so happy to do.
That's wonderful. I've been doom scrolling Instagram, and I ended up flicking through loads of comedy stuff on Instagram. And there was something that came up in my feed this morning, which made me laugh. There was a Romanian comedian came on and said, the problem for you English people is that we all understand your language. And we have stupid people, but you don't know our language.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're disadvantaged because we all know what stupid things you're saying. So it made me laugh. But I also thinking about, there wasn't really loads of comedy on social media to the extent that there is now. There's tons and tons of clips, and there's a rich body of stuff. And it's given how a lot of the internet is now paywalled, have you found that you're putting more, you said earlier that you're doing stuff, quite a lot of stuff on TikTok and Instagram and so on. Have you found that since COVID, as stuff has gone more online, that you're doing, has it changed the way that you produce comedy and how you get your material out to audiences?
Definitely. It's been a challenging learning curve, but every gig now that any of us do, it's become standard practice to film every single one, even if it is just on your iPhone. Ideally, it would be a better quality than just an iPhone, or other phones obviously are available. But then to be able to clip those up, and which clips are you going to put out there? Because sometimes you really rely on crowd work to be able to put those clips out there, because that will be individual to the room. You're not burning through all of your material that you don't really want everybody to see until they come to your shows. So it's a delicate balance of being able to showcase yourself to potential people who might want to book you, either for corporate gigs or for other comedy gigs, and also for audiences to get a flavour of you before they buy tickets to come see your tour show, for example. Have that balanced with not burning through all of your material so that nobody has any mystery and nobody's surprised when they come along. And also you're not getting paid for any of that. All of that's just being put out there for free, whether it's on YouTube, unless you're monetizing it. And so it does mean that it's really important more than ever that people do support live comedy. I think that it's lovely that people are able to engage in new ways, but then the added thing is make sure that you follow that up by going to buy to go to see those comedians or book them for your corporate event. Like that's how we make a living. Otherwise, we really will struggle with the rising cost of living just like anybody else to keep a roof over our heads. And I suppose another aspect of it is that the industry is leaning much more heavily on the content creators. So every year you see more and more content creators putting on shows at various festivals. Now, for me, I think this is wonderful because it's a new art form, but it is a different art form. It's different. And some people are able to do both comedy, like short form comedy, long form comedy, content creating comedy, which is, very, very short form, and being, live on stage, or they can do it all. Other people have certain strengths that they play to. And for me, I love doing voiceover work and I love doing editing. I have yet to merge that kind of short form content online. I'm much more up for clipping up my onstage routines into shorter clips. I try to make it as accessible as possible. So for anything that's a visual gag, trying to do some sort of voiceover to make sure that anyone who's visually impaired will be able to also access the comedy, making sure that there's also captions as much as I possibly can, and even adding extra comedy into the captions so that you have little stickers flashing up that'll add hopefully to some of the jokes. So getting more playful with that. And equally with all of that, that's extra work, that's extra time out of my day, all of which I'm not getting paid for.
No.
So
I understand. It's a challenge because, I mean, you need to get paid, right? We want you to be paid so that you can continue doing the work that you're doing. At the same time, with the sort of the fragmentation of the internet, it's very difficult for everybody to access stuff and be able to afford to, because there's all of these sort of different platforms that are all asking you to pay. So, it's as you say, finding that balance between reaching an audience and getting paid and being able to eat. Antonio, I know you also had a question.
I was just going to add in that something like Twitch is a wonderful place where, people can donate if they would like to, if you have a donation, and they can give you tips, really. And I think that's a nice model to work by. Sometimes it's a lot like the free fringe up at the Edinburgh Fringe, where, people who can afford to give a bit more, that helps to cover other people who can't afford to give anything. And I think, again, in making comedy and art accessible to people, it needs to not only be accessible within access needs, it needs to be accessible within financial needs as well.
Yeah.
So sorry about the buzzing. Would you like me to pause? Oh, no, it's finished.
No,
it's okay.
But on the platforms, when we are putting original content out there, do you feel that sometimes the platforms end up favoring other creators who just steal your content? They just copy it. And sometimes they build their own popularity and following, taking advantage of the content of someone else.
It's very hard to police plagiarism in that way now that the internet has, it's taken over. Again, this is why I personally feel that as much as I love a lot of the connections that can be made on the internet, and please, if anyone who's listening to this or engaging with this would like to find my social media, Instagram is where I tend to spend the most time. But also I am on Blue Sky, I'm on Facebook, and I can give all my details of socials at the end, and YouTube, of course, as well. But I would say that being at a live comedy event, if you can, and that can be live comedy via a streaming, service, or via Twitch or an online Zoom virtual gig, those do still happen for the very reason that you just mentioned, that there's sometimes a global community you want to reach, and the best way of doing that is virtually. And I loved doing virtual gigs. For me, that was using the community idea, but changing it from a live audience to being in a chat at the side of your virtual show. I think being able to unite people in that way is vital. And I was working for a mental health research charity for 2 years in the past 5. And a lot of the latest research is really supporting the fact that that social cure for mental illness is right there for us. And it needs to be that live event, coming to the festivals, the live comedy. I really feel passionately about that. So to come and join us and remember what it feels like to laugh hysterically at a comedian on stage with other people around you that are complete strangers, because you've got a family right there.
The atmosphere in the room when people are laughing, it's uplifting. So this has been fabulous. I've got one final thing before we close. So we're running over a little bit. I really wanted to ask you, following up from Antonio's question about content creation and so on. A lot of content is being generated right now. And there's, you talked about plagiarism from people, but there's potential plagiarism through AI. Do you think AI can do comedy, or will it always fall flat on its face?
So far, and I have tested the theory, I do have some very close friends who work in AI, and we have big disagreements about it, particularly around creativity. Because like I said earlier, for me, the most human things possible are experiencing poor mental health and, an element of madness, and then creation, like creating things, whether that be life, whether that be nurturing a plant, whether it's creating beautiful art. There's the element of the human in it. And there is something very disconnected when you see visual art created by AI. And when I've tested the joke writing ability, there's nothing like the weird and wonderful mind map that comes from a human. AI can learn how to write in a specific way, but they don't understand the the absurdity of what it's like to have eyebrows and elbows, and to say the wrong thing to your in-laws, and to blurt out the wrong thing in the middle of the wrong context, and to feel awkward, and to make your friends laugh in a group chat about something ridiculous. And there's something about the telling of it as well, that every joke, there's an authenticity that the audience feels. And I know that because sometimes I might be telling a joke that I've told for too long, and it's now something that I don't connect with anymore, or it's not relevant to my current experience. The audience picks up on that. It's a beautiful magic where we detect authenticity in somebody. We detect where that joke's coming from and whether that person is passionate about getting that point of view across. And sadly, or maybe fortunately, AI's point of view is incredibly removed. It's something that I think that we need comedy in the way that we have evolved to need comedy. Laughter was one of the first things that we learned to do after, singing and screaming. And it's something that, predates language, laughter. It means that it shows our nervous system that we're safe if we're laughing. Our whole nervous system calms down from sending signals of you don't need to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It means that we're safe. It's breaking that tension. And I think that AI can't learn that.
No, I agree. It can't make you snort your drink out of your nose in the same way that human comedians can. And I hope that it never gets to that point. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation. I need to thank Amazon and MyClearText for supporting us to stay on air, stay captioned, etc. So where can we find you? Do you have a website? We know that you're already on most of the social channels. Do you have some crazy handle, or is it just your name?
I'll run down all of them. So my website is Juliette Burton. Juliette is spelt with 2 T's and an E, like the French version of the name, because I'm clinging on to any ounce of being European. But it is Juliette, like the English Shakespeare character that you wrote about in your English GCSEs, but like the French in your French GCSEs. So I'm like 2 GCSEs in one woman. I'm trying to tell you, I'm a lot of hard work. JulietteBurton.co.uk. You can find me on there, but you can also find me on socials at Juliette_Burton on Instagram, Juliette Burton on Blue Sky and TikTok. On Facebook, it's Juliette Burton Writer Performer, because I set that one up before any of the others, and that was the one that I went for. And I also have Juliette Burton _voiceover on Instagram as well, if you want to see some voiceover work that I do. On YouTube, it's the Juliette Burton, which makes me sound very grand.
One and only.
The only one.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. And please do reach out to me. Thank you for having me on here. And I hope to hear from everybody who's listening to this soon. I hope to be back on this podcast maybe. Maybe let's not leave it 5 years.
I agree.
Hope not.